Please, don't kick me, I'm already hurt. The waitress cried, then Undercover Mafia boss did this. The thunderous roar of motorcycle engines shattered the usual symphony of the upscale restaurant. The massive front doors burst open, sending a blast of cool air through Vittorio's. Conversation died as leather-clad figures strode in, their heavy boots echoing against the marble floor. They were all muscle and menace. But one figure drew Elena's attention. Immediately, he moved with the fluid grace of a predator, perfectly controlled, while chaos swirled around him. His presence seemed to suck the air from the room. "Table for 8, he said, his voice quiet but carrying effortlessly across the space. The maitre d' frantically led them to the largest table, Elena's section. She approached, order pad clutched tightly. The bikers sprawled, but he sat straight-backed, watching her approach with dark, unblinking eyes. Those eyes seemed to see right through her, past her uniform, straight to her core. She felt exposed, vulnerable. "Good evening, gentlemen," she managed, voice steady. "Can I start you off with some drinks?" The bikers called out orders, but Elena was too aware of him, of his steady gaze still fixed on her face. When the others finished, he lifted one hand, silencing his companions. "Macallan, 25. Neat," he said, his voice carrying quiet power. When she looked up again, his lips had curved into the barest suggestion of a smirk. There was something knowing in that expression, something that made her stomach clench with instinctive unease. She held his gaze a moment too long, caught like a moth drawn to flame. The smirk deepened just slightly. Elena forced herself to turn away, but she could feel his eyes following her every step. His silence was louder than all their noise combined. Before you continue listening, comment where in the world are you watching from today. Elena approached the biker's table, her order pad clutched tight against her chest like a shield. The leather-clad men crowded around the table, their laughter too loud for the refined atmosphere of Vittorio's. But Victor, he remained still, a dark center in the storm of noise and movement. "Are you ready to order?" she asked, proud that her voice stayed steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Before anyone could answer, one of the bikers jerked his elbow out, catching her arm. The movement sent her stumbling sideways, and the glass of red wine she'd been balancing on her tray tipped. Dark liquid splashed across the pristine white tablecloth, droplets landing on Victor's expensive leather jacket. The bikers erupted in harsh laughter. Elena's face burned as she scrambled for napkins, mentally calculating how much that jacket probably cost. More than she made in a month, she was certain. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, dabbing at the spill. "Let me get something to clean this. Please, don't kick me." Victor's voice cut through the chaos, smooth as silk but edged with something dangerous. "I'm already hurt." Elena's hands stilled. His tone was light, playful even, but there was nothing friendly in those dark eyes as they fixed on her. He was mocking her, she realized, turning her clumsiness into a game for his amusement. "I really am sorry about your jacket." She tried again, fighting to maintain her professional composure. "I can have it dry cleaned." "Can you?" He raised an eyebrow, that same cruel amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "And how much does a waitress at Vittorio's make? Enough to cover Italian leather." Heat crept up her neck. The other bikers watched the exchange like sharks scenting blood, their earlier laughter dying down to anticipatory silence. Elena wanted to look away from Victor's intense stare, but something in those dark eyes held her captive. "I'll figure something out," she said, lifting her chin slightly. She wouldn't let him intimidate her, no matter how powerful he clearly was. "I'm sure you will." His voice dropped lower, meant only for her ears. "You seem resourceful." There was something in the way he said it, like he knew something about her, something she hadn't told him. The weight of his gaze felt deliberate, measuring, Elena's hands trembled as she gathered the wine-soaked napkins. "I'll get your food orders in a moment," she managed, stepping back from the table. "Let me clean this up first." But even as she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her. The weight of his attention followed her across the restaurant floor, pressing against her skin like a physical touch. When she glanced back, he was still watching her, that same unreadable expression on his face. His stillness was unnatural, predatory. The other bikers had returned to their loud conversations, but Victor remained focused solely on her, as though she were the only thing of interest in the entire restaurant. As she hurried to fetch clean linens and a new tablecloth, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a random encounter. The way he looked at her felt too intentional, too knowing. His presence settled over her like a heavy cloak, and no matter how she tried to focus on her tasks, she couldn't escape the sensation of those dark eyes following her every move. The evening had settled into its usual rhythm at Vittorio's, the dining room dimmer and more intimate than the night before. Elena's hands still trembled slightly when she thought about Victor's intense stare from yesterday. She'd spent the whole day trying to convince herself it was nothing, that he was just another dangerous customer who wouldn't return. She was wrong. The heavy wooden doors burst open with such force that the hinges groaned. Victor strode in first, his presence commanding the space before his boots even hit the polished floor. More bikers filed in behind him, their leather jackets creaking as they moved. Elena's stomach dropped at the sight of them spreading throughout the restaurant, taking strategic positions she hadn't noticed yesterday. The first gunshot shattered a crystal chandelier. Screams erupted as shards of glass rained down. Elena's training disappeared, all those years of perfect service forgotten in an instant as she dropped to her knees, crawling under the nearest table. Her breath came in sharp gasps as more shots rang out. Through the chaos of fleeing customers and overturned chairs, she could see Victor. He hadn't moved, hadn't even flinched. His expression remained carved from stone as he assessed the situation, his eyes scanning the room with deadly precision. The rival gang members, she counted 5 of them, had burst in through both entrances, their faces twisted with rage and purpose. "Dreykov!" one of them shouted. "This ends tonight!" Victor's response was simple, a slight tilt of his head, almost curious. Then he moved. Elena had never seen anyone move like that before. Victor's actions were fluid, efficient, terrible in their grace. He reached for the first attacker, disarming him with one brutal twist that ended with a sickening crack. The man screamed, but Victor was already moving to the next target. His bikers engaged the others, but Elena couldn't tear her eyes away from Victor. He fought like he was conducting a symphony of violence, each movement calculated and precise. When one of the rivals rushed him with a knife, Victor deflected the blade and, in one smooth motion, turned it back on his attacker. The man dropped to the floor, clutching his throat, his blood spreading across the expensive tiles. Elena pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a whimper. She should have been terrified, and she was, but there was something else, something that made it impossible to look away. Victor moved with such control, such absolute certainty. Even in the middle of this nightmare, he appeared completely unaffected, as if this dance of death was just another business transaction. The fight ended as quickly as it had begun. 4 bodies lay motionless on the floor, while the 5th attacker had fled. The restaurant was silent, except for the distant wail of approaching sirens. That's when Victor's eyes found her. He stood in the center of the carnage, his expensive suit somehow still immaculate. Blood stained the floor around his polished shoes, but his face showed no sign of exertion or concern. His gaze locked onto Elena with an intensity that made her breath catch. She watched, frozen, as he crossed the room toward her. His steps were unhurried, deliberate, like a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. When he reached her, Victor extended his hand. Elena stared at it, noticing absently that his knuckles were scraped raw. His fingers brushed her arm, gentle, despite the violence she'd just witnessed. The touch sent electricity through her skin, making her shiver. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled, carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "You're coming with me," he said, his accent thicker than before. "It's not safe here." The leather seat of Victor's car was cold against Elena's skin as he guided her inside with firm hands. Her breath came in short gasps, the night air sharp in her lungs as she tried to process what was happening. The interior of the luxury vehicle smelled of expensive leather and something distinctly masculine. Victor's cologne. "You can't do this," Elena said, her voice shakier than she wanted it to be. "You can't just kidnap people." Victor's profile remained stoic as he settled beside her, his broad shoulders taking up too much space in the back seat. The driver pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the chaos of the restaurant. Street lights flashed across Victor's face in rhythmic patterns, highlighting the sharp angle of his jaw, the dangerous glint in his eyes. He finally spoke, his voice low and controlled. "This is protection." Elena's laugh came out bitter. "Protection? From what? The only danger I've seen tonight came from you and your men." The car glided through the city streets, each turn taking them further from familiar territory. Elena pressed herself against the door, maintaining as much distance as possible from Victor's imposing presence. She tried the handle. Locked, of course. "Those men who attacked tonight," Victor said, "they won't stop. They know who you are now. They've seen you with me. I wasn't with you. I was serving tables. It's my job." Victor turned to her then, his gaze intense enough to make her shrink back. "You don't understand the world you've stumbled into, Elena." The use of her name sent a chill down her spine. He shouldn't know it. She wasn't wearing a name tag. The car wound its way up a private drive, coming to stop before a mansion that looked more like a fortress. Modern architecture met old-world grandeur, all glass and stone and imposing security features. Armed men stood at attention as the car approached. Victor's hand found the small of her back as he guided her from the car. Elena's legs trembled, but she forced herself to walk steady, refusing to show weakness. The massive front doors opened to reveal an interior that matched the grandeur outside: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that probably cost more than she'd make in 10 lifetimes. "You'll stay here," Victor stated, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Your room is upstairs. Everything you need will be provided." "My room?" Elena spun to face him, anger finally overwhelming her fear. "I have my own apartment, my own life. You can't just—" "I can." He cut her off, stepping closer. His presence seemed to fill the entire foyer. "And I will. Your safety is now my priority, whether you like it or not." A woman appeared, elegant and professional-looking, carrying what appeared to be fresh clothes. Victor nodded to her. "Maria will show you to your room. Try to rest. We'll discuss more tomorrow." Before Elena could protest further, Victor turned and walked away, leaving her with the silent Maria. The woman led her up a curved staircase to a suite that was bigger than Elena's entire apartment. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a breathtaking view of the city below. Elena waited until Maria left before approaching the window. The city lights twinkled below, familiar yet suddenly so distant. Her fingers traced the cool glass as her reflection stared back at her. She looked pale, shaken, but something else lingered in her eyes. A spark of curiosity, maybe even intrigue, that she didn't want to acknowledge. Her gaze drifted to the door. She knew it would be locked, knew she was trapped here in this gilded cage. But what terrified her most wasn't the loss of freedom. It was the way her heart raced when she thought of Victor, the man who had brought her here. The man who had killed without hesitation, yet looked at her with such intensity it made her breath catch. Elena paced the polished marble floors of Victor's mansion, her footsteps echoing through the vast hallways. Sunlight streamed through towering windows, casting long shadows across expensive artwork and antique furniture. Everything screamed wealth and power, from the crystal chandeliers to the intricate moldings, but it felt cold, like a museum where she couldn't touch anything. She ran her fingers along a mahogany table, trying to ground herself in reality. The mansion was beautiful, but it felt like a gilded prison. Servants moved silently through the halls, averting their eyes whenever she passed. They knew better than to speak to Victor's guest. The sound of heavy footsteps made her freeze. Victor emerged from his study, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Russian. His voice was sharp, commanding. Even when he wasn't looking at her, his presence filled the space like smoke, making it hard to breathe. Elena pretended to study a painting, but her attention was fixed on him. He ended his call abruptly, and the silence that followed was deafening. Elena could feel his eyes on her back, watching, always watching. When she turned, he was leaning against the doorframe, his dark suit perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders. His face remained unreadable, but there was something predatory in his stance. Throughout the day, Elena noticed the way others responded to him. His men practically tripped over themselves to follow his orders. A single look from Victor could silence a room. He ruled his empire with iron control, dispatching orders that she knew meant violence somewhere in the city. Yet when he spoke to her, his voice held a different edge, still commanding, but with an underlying warmth that made her pulse quicken. She caught glimpses of another side to him, the way he absently stroked his brother's photo on his desk when he thought no one was looking, how his hands clenched into fists at mentions of betrayal, the gentle way he treated an elderly maid who'd apparently served his family for decades. Elena tried to hate him. She should hate him. He'd kidnapped her, trapped her in this beautiful cage, but there was something magnetic about him that drew her in, despite her better judgment. Every time he entered a room, the air seemed to crackle with electricity. As evening fell, Elena found herself in the library, running her fingers along leather-bound spines. The room smelled of old books and expensive cognac. She sensed him before she saw him. That distinctive weight to the air that announced his presence. Victor stood in the doorway, his silver eyes reflecting the warm lamplight. He'd removed his suit jacket, his white shirt stretched across his chest. The darkness outside made the windows black mirrors, reflecting their images back at them. Elena's heart thundered in her chest as he moved closer, his steps measured and deliberate. She backed away until she felt the bookshelf behind her. Victor continued forward until he was right there, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine. He placed one hand on the shelf beside her head, effectively caging her in. "You can't run, Elena," he whispered, his accent thicker than usual. His other hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, the touch making her shiver. "Not from me. You belong here now." His words should have terrified her. Instead, they sent a jolt of heat through her body. Elena stood frozen, caught between fear and something else, something darker and more dangerous than fear. Victor's presence surrounded her like a gathering storm, and she knew with sudden clarity that she was in trouble. Not from his violence or his power, but from the way her body responded to his proximity, from the way her heart raced when he looked at her like this. The heavy oak door creaked open as Victor guided Elena down a winding stone staircase. His hand rested firmly on the small of her back, both a warning and a possessive claim. The air grew colder with each step, and Elena's skin prickled with goosebumps. "Where are we going?" she whispered, her voice echoing off the walls. Victor's reply was cold and simple. "You need to understand what happens to those who cross me." The basement opened into a dimly lit room. Metal chairs scattered the concrete floor, and chains hung from exposed pipes. A man sat bound to one of the chairs, his face bruised and bloody. Two of Victor's men stood guard, their expressions blank. Elena's stomach churned. She tried to step back, but Victor's grip tightened. "Stay!" he commanded. The bound man lifted his head, revealing swollen eyes and split lips. "Please, Victor," he croaked. "I can explain, Mikhail." Victor's voice cut through the air like ice. "You sold information to the Castellanos. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Elena watched as Victor circled the chair, his movements predatory. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't the controlled businessman she'd seen at the restaurant. This was something else entirely. Something darker. "They offered me money," Mikhail whimpered. "My daughter needs surgery. You could have come to me." Victor's words were soft, almost gentle, but his eyes remained cold. "Instead, you chose to betray me. Now your daughter will grow up without a father." Elena couldn't stop the small gasp that escaped her lips. Victor's head snapped toward her, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was no warmth there, no mercy, just raw power and authority. He pulled out a gun, the metal gleaming in the dim light. "Watch carefully, Elena," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is what happens to anyone who betrays my trust." The gunshot echoed through the room. Elena flinched, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Mikhail's body slumped forward, blood pooling beneath the chair. Victor holstered his weapon with practiced ease, as if he hadn't just ended a man's life. "Clean this up," he ordered his men, then turned to Elena. His eyes raked over her trembling form, taking in her pale face and wide eyes. Instead of fear, he saw something else in her expression. A flash of dark fascination that made his lips curl into a knowing smirk. "You're not running," he observed, stepping closer. "Most women would be screaming by now." Elena's voice shook, but she held her ground. "Maybe I'm not most women." "No," Victor agreed, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "You're not. That's why you're here." Later that night, Elena lay in her bed, staring at the ornate ceiling. The scene from the basement played on repeat in her mind. The gunshot, the blood, Victor's cold efficiency. She should be horrified. She should be planning her escape. Instead, she found herself replaying the way Victor had looked at her, the power that radiated from him, the dark promise in his eyes. The door to her room opened slowly, and Victor's silhouette filled the doorway. "Can't sleep?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "How can I?" Elena whispered. "After what I saw. If you want to stay safe," Victor's voice cut through the darkness. "Stay close. I don't share what's mine." He lingered for a moment longer before closing the door, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts. The moonlight cast long shadows across the mansion's manicured lawn as Elena crept through the darkness. Her heart thundered in her chest, each beat a countdown to freedom or failure. She'd waited until the guards changed shifts, watching their patterns for days. Now was her chance. The gravel crunched beneath her feet as she made her way toward the iron gates. Each step felt like an eternity, her muscles tense with anticipation. The night air was cool against her skin, carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden. It would be the last time she'd smell it, if she succeeded. "Going somewhere?" Victor's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Elena froze, her blood turning to ice in her veins. He emerged from the shadows like a predator, his movements fluid and controlled. She hadn't even heard him approach. The words died in her throat as his eyes locked onto hers. There was no rage in his expression, only a terrifying calm that made her stomach clench. "Inside, now." His tone left no room for argument. When she didn't move immediately, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming her senses. "Don't make me ask twice, Elena." She turned, her legs moving of their own accord. Victor's hand settled on the small of her back, guiding her with deceptive gentleness. The warmth of his touch seemed to burn through her clothes, marking her. Inside the mansion, the air felt thick with tension. Victor directed her to his study, closing the door behind them with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence. Elena's fingers twisted in the fabric of her shirt as she waited for his fury to explode. But Victor didn't rage. He didn't raise his voice or make threats. Instead, he poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the light as he swirled it in the crystal glass. His silence was worse than any shouting could have been. "Did you really think you could leave?" he finally asked, his voice dangerously soft. "That I wouldn't know your every move before you made it?" Elena lifted her chin, trying to hold on to her defiance. "I'm not your prisoner." A cold smile curved his lips. "No? Then why are you trembling?" She hadn't realized she was shaking until he pointed it out. Victor set down his glass and approached her with measured steps. Each movement was calculated, predatory. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with surprising tenderness. "You can try to run all you want, Elena," he murmured, his fingers trailing down her cheek. "But you'll never get far. Not because I won't let you, but because you don't really want to leave." The truth in his words struck her like a physical blow. She wanted to deny it, to scream that he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. His touch lingered on her skin, and she found herself leaning into it despite herself. "Go to your room," Victor commanded softly. "We'll discuss this further tomorrow." Elena retreated, her legs unsteady as she climbed the stairs. In her room, she sank onto the bed, her attempted escape playing on repeat in her mind. The lock clicked into place outside her door, but she barely noticed. She lay there in the darkness, feeling the phantom touch of Victor's fingers on her skin. The worst part wasn't that she'd failed to escape, it was that he was right. With every passing day, the invisible chains binding her to him grew stronger. She wasn't just physically trapped within these walls, she was emotionally ensnared by the dangerous man who held her captive. Elena pressed her face into the pillow, trying to block out the truth she couldn't deny any longer. Victor had become like oxygen, terrifying but necessary. And no matter how hard she fought it, she was drowning in him. Chapter 8. The Deal. Elena stood at the window of her luxurious prison, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. 7 days had passed since her failed escape attempt. 7 days of Victor's intense stares and calculated movements around her. The mansion felt smaller with each passing hour, his presence filling every corner. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. "Mr. Dreykov wants to see you in his office." The guard's voice was gruff, leaving no room for argument. Her heart thundered against her ribs as she followed him down the hallway. Victor's office door loomed before her, heavy wood that seemed to guard secrets as dark as the man himself. Inside, Victor sat behind his massive desk, his sharp features highlighted by the warm glow of a desk lamp. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. Elena lowered herself into the seat, keeping her spine straight, refusing to show weakness. The leather creaked beneath her, the sound too loud in the quiet room. "You've been here for some time now," Victor began, his accent thicker than usual. "I think it's time we discuss your position here." "My position?" Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm your prisoner." Victor's laugh was low, dangerous. "Is that what you think?" He stood, circling the desk with predatory grace. "No, Elena, you're much more than that." He stopped beside her chair, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "I'm offering you a deal." "What kind of deal?" She forced herself to meet his gaze, though it felt like staring into an abyss. "Security." His fingers brushed her shoulder, sending unwanted shivers down her spine. "A place in my world. And if I refuse, you won't." His confidence made her blood boil. "Because you understand now, there's no going back to your old life." The moment you caught my attention, your fate was sealed. Elena stood abruptly, needing to put distance between them. You can't just decide that for me. I already have. Victor's voice remained calm, but his eyes darkened. The question isn't whether you'll stay, it's how. Under my protection, safe and provided for, or as an enemy. The threat hung in the air between them. Elena's hands trembled as she processed his words. Why me? Because you're different. He moved closer, backing her against the wall. You challenge me. Fight me. No one does that anymore. His hand came up to cup her face, the touch surprisingly gentle. I can keep you safe, Elena, or I can destroy everything you hold dear. The choice is yours. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the whiskey on his breath. This close, she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the slight scar above his eyebrow. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things often were, like a knife's edge catching the light. You're mine, he said softly. The words, both a caress and a collar. His eyes held something she couldn't read, something that made her wonder what he truly wanted from her. She stood frozen, caught between terror and a treacherous attraction that grew stronger with each passing day. Victor's thumb traced her lower lip, and she couldn't stop the small gasp that escaped her. His smile turned predatory at the sound, knowing he had her exactly where he wanted her. The heavy curtains in Victor's mansion cast long shadows across the marble floors as Elena paced through the halls. Days had blurred together since her capture, each one marked by Victor's unwavering presence. She couldn't escape his dark gaze following her every move, his calculated proximity that sent shivers down her spine. Tonight was no different. The dining room gleamed with crystal and silver, a stark contrast to the prison this mansion had become. Elena sat across from Victor, watching as he effortlessly commanded his men with subtle gestures and quiet words. A phone call interrupted their meal, some business matter, and she observed how his voice remained steady while ordering what she knew would be someone's punishment, or worse. More wine? He asked after ending the call, reaching for her glass before she could respond. His fingers brushed hers deliberately as he took it, and Elena felt that familiar jolt of electricity at his touch. I'm fine, she managed, but her voice wavered. Are you? His eyes locked onto hers, intense and knowing. You barely touched your food. The concern in his voice seemed genuine, but Elena knew better. Everything Victor did was calculated. Yet she couldn't deny how her body responded to his presence, how her breath caught when he leaned closer. I'm not hungry, she replied, trying to maintain her composure. Victor's lip curled slightly. You need to eat, Elena. I won't have you wasting away under my protection. Protection? She couldn't help but scoff. Darkened, but not with anger. Something else flickered in those stormy eyes: desire, possession, need. He gestured to one of his men, dismissing them from the room until they were alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tensions. Elena watched as Victor took a slow sip of his wine, his movements deliberate and graceful despite his imposing presence. Even in these quiet moments, he exuded power. You know why you're here, he said finally, his voice low and controlled. The question is, why do you keep fighting it? Elena's heart hammered in her chest. Fighting what? This. He motioned between them. Us. The way you respond to me, even when you're trying so hard not to. Heat crept up her neck. She wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself mesmerized by the way his fingers traced the rim of his wine glass, imagining those same fingers on her skin. The dinner concluded in tense silence, the air between them charged with unspoken desires. As Elena rose to leave, Victor's hand caught her wrist. He pulled her aside, his broad frame blocking her escape. His cologne enveloped her, a heady mix of leather and spice that made her head spin. He leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. "I know you feel it," he whispered, his voice rough with desire. Elena's pulse quickened, her body betraying her as it responded to his proximity. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the raw power he contained barely held in check. The line between fear and attraction had grown so thin she could barely distinguish between them anymore. Her breath came in short gasps as Victor's thumb traced circles on her wrist, each touch sending sparks of electricity through her body. The evening air carried the sweet scent of jasmine as Elena wandered through Victor's sprawling garden. Marble fountains gurgled softly in the gathering dusk, and perfectly manicured hedges cast long shadows across the stone pathways. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to shake off the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Earlier that day, she'd witnessed Victor's ruthless side again, the way he'd handled his enemies. Cold, calculated, lethal. Yet here she was, still in his garden, still unable to leave. The contradiction twisted inside her like a knife. The crunch of gravel behind her made her spine stiffen. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. Victor's presence had a weight all its own, an electric charge that made the air heavy with tension. His footsteps drew closer, measured and deliberate. The wind rustled through the cypress trees, carrying with it the metallic hint of an approaching storm. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as Victor's warmth radiated against her back. He was close, too close, but she couldn't make herself move away. Without warning, his hands gripped her shoulders, spinning her to face him. His touch burned through the thin fabric of her dress. Elena gasped at the sudden movement, finding herself trapped in his intense gaze. His eyes were dark, hungry, and his chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. "Victor," she started. But the word died in her throat as his hand slid up to cup the back of her neck. There was no hesitation in his movement as he crushed his lips against hers. The kiss was demanding, possessive, everything Victor was. His other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his hard chest. Elena's hands came up instinctively to push against him, but the heat of his mouth was intoxicating. Her resistance crumbled like sand. Her fingers clutched at his shirt instead of pushing him away, and a small sound escaped her throat as she surrendered to the kiss. Victor growled in response, deepening the kiss until Elena felt dizzy with need. His cologne surrounded her, spice and leather and danger, as his tongue swept into her mouth. Elena's world narrowed to the points where their bodies connected. His hand in her hair, his arm around her waist, his chest against hers. The garden spun away until there was nothing but Victor and the burning desire he ignited in her blood. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Victor's pupils were blown wide with satisfaction as he looked down at her, his thumb tracing her swollen bottom lip. A smirk played at the corners of his mouth, triumph written in every line of his face. "You'll never escape me," he murmured, his voice rough with promise and possession. Elena's heart thundered in her chest as the truth hit her with devastating clarity. She didn't want to escape. Not anymore. Despite everything he was, everything he'd done, she wanted this dangerous man who held her like she was both precious and his to destroy. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, but Elena barely noticed its warmth. She sat at the edge of her bed, fingers touching her lips where Victor's kiss still burned. The memory of last night in the garden haunted her, making her stomach twist with a mix of desire and self-loathing. She'd kissed him back. That was the part she couldn't get past. The knock on her door made her jump. A maid entered with breakfast. But Elena couldn't eat. Her appetite had vanished the moment Victor's lips had claimed hers. She paced the room instead, trying to sort through the chaos in her mind. "This is insane," she muttered to herself, running her hands through her hair. "He's a monster, a killer." But her body didn't seem to care about that distinction. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt his hands on her shoulders, the heat of his breath, the demanding press of his mouth against hers. The worst part was how right it had felt in that moment. Elena managed to avoid him through breakfast, slipping through the mansion's corridors like a ghost. But Victor's presence was everywhere. His security guards watched her. His staff monitored her movements, and she could feel his eyes on her, even when she couldn't see him. By afternoon, her nerves were frayed. She tried to read in the library, but the words blurred together. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her tense. Each time the door opened, her heart raced, expecting to see him. When Victor finally appeared, it was like the air had been sucked from the room. He stood in the doorway, powerful and predatory, his dark gaze fixed on her. Elena's body responded instantly, heart racing, skin flushing, breath catching. "Running from me?" His voice was soft, dangerous. "I'm not running," Elena said, but her voice trembled. "I just need space." Victor's laugh was low, without humor. "Space?" He moved closer, each step deliberate. "That's not what your body said last night." Heat flooded her cheeks. That was a mistake. Was it? He was closer now, close enough that she could smell his cologne. "Your pulse says otherwise." His fingers brushed her neck, finding the racing beat there. "You can lie to yourself, Elena, but you can't lie to me." She stepped back, but he followed, matching her retreat, step for step, until her back hit the bookshelf. "I hate you," she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. "No," Victor said, his eyes darkening. "You hate that you want me. You hate that one kiss from me has gotten under your skin." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her bottom lip. "You hate that you can't stop thinking about it." Elena's breath hitched. He was right. She couldn't stop thinking about it. About him. About the way he'd made her feel with just one kiss. The danger and desire wrapped up in his touch had awakened something in her she couldn't ignore. But that didn't mean she had to accept it. She ducked under his arm, putting distance between them. "This isn't happening," she said, more to herself than him. "I won't let it." Victor watched her retreat, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes that made her shiver. A promise, a threat, a certainty that this game between them was far from over. Late that night, Elena tried to sneak down to the kitchen. The halls were dark, quiet, except for the distant sound of guards patrolling. She'd almost made it when a hand shot out from the shadows, pulling her into an alcove. Victor pressed her against the wall, his body caging her in. In the darkness, his eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire. "I warned you," he said softly, his words caressing her skin like velvet. "You belong to me now." The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Victor's mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Elena paced in her room, her fingers trembling as she clenched them into fists. The kiss from last night still burned on her lips, a constant reminder of how far she'd fallen into his web. She couldn't take it anymore. The waiting, the watching, the way he made her feel both trapped and desperately wanted. With determined steps, she marched down the hallway toward his office, where she knew he'd be working. The door was open, and Victor sat behind his massive desk, his dark gaze fixed on some paperwork. He didn't look up when she entered, but she knew he was aware of her presence. He always was. "Let me go," Elena demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm not your prisoner, and I'm not your possession." Victor slowly set down his pen, leaning back in his leather chair. His eyes met hers, cold and calculating. "Are you quite finished?" "No, I'm not finished." Elena's voice rose. You can't keep manipulating me like this. The kiss, it was a mistake. All of this is wrong. Victor rose from his chair with fluid grace, moving around the desk until he stood before her. He didn't touch her, but his presence surrounded her like a physical force. A mistake? His voice was soft, dangerous. Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night, Elena? She took a step back, but he matched it, never letting her create distance between them. You think I'm manipulating? You? He continued, his accent thicker with emotion. I've given you every comfort, protected you, shown you more patience than I've shown anyone. I never asked for any of that. Elena's back hit the wall, and Victor placed his hands on either side of her head, caging her in. You never had to ask. His words caressed her skin like silk over steel. From the moment I saw you in that restaurant, you were mine. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. Elena's heart thundered in her chest. She could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. You can't own people, she whispered. A dark smile curved his lips. Can't I? His finger traced her jawline, gentle but possessive. Your pulse races when I'm near. Your breath catches when I touch you. You may hate the idea of belonging to me, but your body knows the truth. She wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat. Victor leaned closer, his lips brushing her ear. You're not leaving, Elena. Not today. Not ever. The sooner you understand that, the better for both of us. His words should have terrified her, but instead, they sent a shiver of something else down her spine, something darker, more primal. Victor pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, and the heat in his gaze made her knees weak. Stop fighting this, he commanded softly. Stop fighting me. Elena lifted her chin defiantly, even as her body betrayed her by leaning into his touch. And if I don't? His hand slid to her throat, not squeezing, just resting there, a reminder of his power, his control. Then I'll enjoy watching you try to resist. But in the end, Moy Angel, you'll come to me willingly, because deep down, you already know you're mine. She stood before him, trembling with a mix of anger and desire. His words wrapped around her like chains, but they were chains she wasn't sure she wanted to break anymore. The game they played was dangerous, the stakes impossibly high, but as Victor's thumb stroked the racing pulse in her neck, Elena realized she was already lost. The defiance in her eyes didn't waver, but they both knew something had shifted. The line between captor and captive had blurred into something far more complex, far more dangerous, and as Victor's gaze dropped to her lips, Elena knew she was falling deeper into his dark world with every passing moment. The heavy oak door of Victor's office creaked open as Elena stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, shadows dancing across the dark wood panels that lined the walls. Victor sat behind his massive desk, his attention fixed on a stack of documents before him. But something was different tonight. The usual rigid set of his shoulders was softer, almost vulnerable. Elena's footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor as she approached. The usual intimidating aura that surrounded him seemed muted, replaced by something she couldn't quite name. His suit jacket was draped over the back of his chair, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, a rare sight of casualness that made him appear almost human. Sit, he said, his voice lacking its usual sharp edge. Elena lowered herself into the leather chair across from him, her fingers nervously tracing the armrest. Victor finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers. The usual coldness was there, but behind it lurked something else, pain, perhaps. He reached for a crystal decanter, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass. My brother Mikhail was killed 10 years ago, he said abruptly, his voice rough. Right here, in this city. His fingers tightened around the glass. He was better than me, kinder, smarter. He wanted to legitimize our business, make it clean. Elena sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break this moment of unexpected openness. Victor took a long drink before continuing. They tortured him for 3 days before killing him. Left his body in front of our family home. His jaw clenched. I was 25, too young to take. Over, they said. Too impulsive. But I did what needed to be done. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Elena watched as Victor's fingers traced the rim of his glass, his eyes distant with memories. I hunted down every person involved. Took me 2 years, but I found them all. His voice dropped lower. The things I did to them. That's when I learned what I was capable of, what this life demands. Elena's heart pounded against her ribs. This was Victor stripped bare, not the Mafia boss who commanded with cold authority, but a man shaped by loss and revenge. She could see the weight of it in the slight slump of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. The power, the control, it's not just about business, he continued. It's survival. In this world, you either control everything or you lose everything. His eyes locked onto hers, intense and searching, including the people you care about. Elena felt the weight of his words settle over her like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just a confession, it was an explanation. For his ruthlessness, his need for control, his possessiveness over her, Victor set down his glass and stood, moving to the window. The city lights sparkled beyond, a deceptively peaceful view. I don't expect you to understand, he said quietly, his back to her, but I need you to stay. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The request hung in the air between them, more vulnerable than any demand he'd ever made. She could feel her resistance wavering, her heart conflicted between sympathy for his past and fear of her future. I'll stay. For now, she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. Her heart thundered in her chest as the words left her lips, knowing they would change everything between them. Elena sat at the window seat in her room, watching rain streak down the glass. The past few days had been different, heavier somehow. Every time Victor entered a room, the air seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. She felt his eyes on her constantly, tracking her movements like a predator studying its prey. She tried to busy herself with small tasks around the mansion, but Victor's presence was inescapable. When she read in the library, he would appear, silently watching from the doorway. During meals, his dark gaze would linger on her face, her neck, her hands. It was maddening. You look beautiful when you're lost in thought, he had said that morning, his voice low and intimate. The comment had sent shivers down her spine, and she hated how her body betrayed her. Now, as evening settled over the grounds, Elena paced her room. Her mind kept drifting to Victor, the way his shoulders tensed when she challenged him, how his jaw clenched when she defied his orders. She couldn't deny the pull anymore, the way her heart raced when he was near. This is ridiculous, she muttered to herself, running her fingers through her hair. But even as she said it, she knew she was lying to herself. Victor had become more demanding, more possessive. This morning, when she'd tried to walk in the gardens alone, he'd appeared beside her, his hand settling on the small of her back. The grounds aren't safe without me, he'd said, but his touch felt more like a claim than protection. She fought back in small ways, ignoring his commands, speaking sharply when he tried to control her movements. But each act of defiance seemed to amuse him more than anger him. His eyes would darken with something that looked dangerously like desire. You can't cage a person's heart, she'd snapped at him earlier, when he'd forbidden her from speaking to one of his men. I don't need to, he'd replied, his fingers grazing her cheek. You're already mine. You just haven't accepted it yet. The memory of his touch made her skin tingle. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, trying to clear her head. But even the rain couldn't wash away the heat building inside her. Heavy, footsteps in the hallway made her turn. Victor stood in her doorway, his presence filling the space. Without a word, he crossed the room and grabbed her arm, pulling her after him. "What are you doing?" she demanded, trying to wrench free. But his grip was firm as he led her down the hallway to a room she'd never entered before. The door clicked shut behind them, the lock engaging with a final sound that made her pulse quicken. Elena backed away, but Victor followed, his eyes dark with intent. "Stop!" she started to say, but Victor's mouth was on hers before she could finish. His kiss was demanding, possessive, stealing her breath and her resistance in one fierce motion. His hands gripped her waist, pulling her against his hard chest. Elena's hands came up to push him away, but instead found themselves clutching his shirt. The heat of his body seeped through her clothes, making her dizzy with want. Still, she fought against the desire, trying to break free from his embrace. Victor's growl vibrated against her lips. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his words a dark promise that sent heat pooling in her stomach. The screams pierced through Elena's dreams, jolting her awake. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she sat up in bed, the silk sheets pooling around her waist. More shouts echoed through the mansion's corridors, followed by the sound of glass shattering. She didn't think twice. Barefoot, wearing only her nightgown, Elena rushed into the hallway. The marble floor was cold beneath her feet as she ran toward the commotion. Victor's voice carried through the darkness, a tone she'd never heard before, raw with fury. The scene that greeted her in Victor's study made her blood run cold. 3 of his most trusted men were on their knees, faces bloodied. Victor stood over them, his usual collected demeanor replaced by barely controlled rage. Papers were scattered across the floor, some stained with crimson droplets. "You think I wouldn't find out?" Victor's voice was deadly quiet. "That I wouldn't notice the money transfers? The leaked information?" One of the men, Marco, who Elena had seen sharing drinks with Victor just days ago, spat blood onto the expensive carpet. The rival gang offered a better deal. "You're losing your grip, Victor. Everyone can see it." Elena pressed herself against the doorframe, trying to make sense of the scene. These weren't just any associates. These were men who regularly dined at Victor's table, who had access to his inner circle, men she'd served drinks to, whose jokes she'd laughed at. Victor's laugh was hollow. "A better deal?" He moved with predatory grace, circling his captives. "Tell me, how many of our own did you sell out? How many died because of your greed?" Another man, Antonio, Victor's cousin, lifted his chin defiantly. "You're not the only one with ambition, cousin. The rival gang is stronger." The crack of Victor's fist connecting with Antonio's jaw echoed through the room. Elena flinched, but couldn't look away. This was Victor's world, in its rawest form: betrayal, violence, power struggles that ended in blood. "Your own family." Victor's voice was thick with disgust. "After everything I did for you." He turned to his guards. "Take them to the warehouse. I'll deal with them properly there." Elena's stomach churned as she realized what that meant. These men wouldn't see another sunrise. As the guards dragged them away, Victor finally noticed her presence. His eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them, filled with a fury that made her take an involuntary step back. "This is what loyalty means in my world," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Everyone has a price. Everyone can be bought." He moved closer to her, and Elena could smell the metallic scent of blood on his clothes. "Everyone. Except you." The weight of those words settled heavy in her chest. Was it a threat or a confession? Before she could decide, Victor grabbed his jacket from the chair. "Stay here! Don't move!" he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. But as he turned to leave, Elena saw something in his eyes she'd never noticed before: uncertainty. For the first time since she'd known him, Victor's perfect control was slipping. She watched him stride away, her mind racing. The mansion suddenly felt different, less like a gilded cage and more like a house of cards ready to collapse. Victor's enemies weren't just outside these walls, they were inside them, wearing the faces of friends and family. The realization hit her hard. She was trapped in a world where trust was a currency no one could afford, where loyalty was as fragile as glass, and where Victor's iron grip on power was beginning to crack. Elena jolted awake to Victor's rough hands shaking her shoulder. The digital clock on her nightstand blinked 3:47 a.m., casting an eerie red glow across his hardened features. "Get up!" he commanded, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "We need her to move. Now." She scrambled out of bed, still wearing the silk nightgown he'd given her. Victor's eyes swept over her before he tossed her a coat. "Put this on." The mansion was alive with activity despite the hour. Armed men moved through the corridors with purpose, their faces grim. Victor kept his hand on the small of her back, guiding her through the chaos to his private office. Once inside, he locked the door and turned to face her. In the dim light, his eyes looked almost black. "My own people have betrayed me," he said, his accent thicker with emotion. "My family, my trusted allies, they've been working with the rival gang all along." Elena's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen the loyalty Victor commanded, the fear he inspired. To think that his own people would turn against him. "I'm going to war," he continued, moving closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "And you're staying right here where I can protect you." "Victor," she started, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. "This isn't negotiable, Elena." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheek in a gesture that was both possessive and tender. "I've lost too much already. I won't lose you too." Over the next few hours, Elena watched as Victor's empire began to fracture. Men who had once bowed to his authority now questioned his every move. Whispers of dissent echoed through the halls, but Victor remained coldly focused, methodically identifying threats and eliminating them with brutal efficiency. She witnessed him interrogate a former lieutenant, the man's screams echoing through the mansion's walls. When Victor emerged, his knuckles were bloodied, but his expression was satisfied. He found Elena waiting in the hallway and pulled her close, pressing his lips to her forehead. "You shouldn't have watched that," he murmured against her skin. "I needed to see," she replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I needed to understand what you are." He pulled back to look at her, something dark and hungry in his gaze. "And now that you've seen?" Elena met his eyes, refusing to look away from the violence she saw there. "Now I understand why they fear you." A message arrived later that morning. The rival gang wanted to meet. Victor read it with a sneer curling his lips, but Elena could see the calculated consideration in his eyes. This was an opportunity, but it was also a trap. "You have a choice," he told her, watching her carefully. "You have a choice: stay here, hidden and protected, or come with me." Elena knew what he was offering, a chance to run, to escape the violence that defined his world. But she also knew that staying behind meant being vulnerable, separated from the one person who could truly protect her. She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "I'm coming with you." His expression didn't change, but something in his posture relaxed infinitesimally. Taking her hand, he led her toward the waiting car, his grip firm and possessive. The sun was just beginning to rise as they made their way to the meeting point, casting long shadows across the empty streets. The warehouse looms before them, a hulking shadow against the night sky. Elena's heartbeat quickens as Victor leads her through the rusty side door, his hand firm on her lower back. The metallic scent of blood mingles with motor oil and rust, making her stomach turn. But there's something else too, a strange calm settling over her despite the danger ahead. Victor's men spread out around them, their weapons ready. The rival gang emerges from the shadows, faces hard and cruel in the dim light. Elena counts at least 15 of them, each one radiating malice. She should be terrified, but standing next to Victor, she feels oddly protected. "You've crossed too many lines." Victor's voice cuts through the silence, cold as ice. The rival gang's leader steps forward, a smirk playing on his scarred face. "Your empire is crumbling, Drakov. Your own people are turning against you." The first shot rings out without warning. Elena flinches, but Victor remains steady beside her. What follows is pure chaos, bullets flying, men shouting, the sickening sound of flesh meeting flesh. Victor moves with lethal grace, each action calculated and precise. He takes down 3 men in quick succession, his movements fluid and ruthless. Elena presses herself against a concrete pillar, unable to look away. Victor's brutality is terrifying. He snaps one man's neck with practiced ease, shoots another point-blank between the eyes. There's no hesitation, no mercy. Blood sprays across his expensive suit, but he doesn't seem to notice. Yet even in his violence, there's something mesmerizing about him. He fights not just with strength but with intelligence, always positioning himself between the danger and where Elena hides. He's protecting her, she realizes, even as he deals death with cold efficiency. A rival gang member spots her and raises his gun. Before she can scream, Victor is there. The man's chest explodes in a spray of red, and Victor's arm wraps around her waist, pulling her behind him. His touch is gentle despite the savagery he's just displayed. "Stay close," he growls, and Elena finds herself pressing against his back, feeling the heat of him even through his blood-stained jacket. The fighting continues, but it's clear who's winning. Victor's men move with practiced coordination, taking down their opponents one by one. The rival gang's numbers dwindle rapidly, their confidence replaced by fear as they realize they've underestimated Victor's power. Elena watches it all, her horror giving way to a deeper understanding. This is Victor's world, brutal, violent, unforgiving. But it's also a world where loyalty means everything, where protection comes at the highest price. She sees now why he's survived so long, why his enemies fear him so completely. The last gunshot echoes through the warehouse. Bodies litter the floor, and the metallic smell of blood is overwhelming. Victor turns to her slowly, his chest heaving slightly. His eyes are dark pools of violence, but as they meet hers, something shifts in them. A softness appears, just for a moment, like a crack in his armor. He steps closer, one hand coming up to cup her face. Blood smears across her cheek, but she doesn't pull away. "You're mine now," he says, his voice rough with emotion. It's not just possession in his words, it's a promise, a declaration of war against anyone who would dare harm her. Elena feels her heart hammering against her ribs. She should run, should be disgusted by the violence she's witnessed. Instead, she finds herself drawn closer to him, pulled in by the gravity of his darkness and the protection it offers. She's crossed a line tonight, one she can never uncross. The warehouse air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and gunpowder. Elena's ears still rang from the gunshots, her heart pounding against her ribs as she surveyed the carnage around her. Bodies littered the concrete floor, a testament to Victor's ruthlessness. He stood in the center of it all, his suit splattered with crimson, his expression carved from stone. Elena pressed herself against the cold wall, trying to steady her breathing. The Victor she knew, the one who watched her with heated eyes across dinner tables and whispered possessive words in dark corridors, seemed worlds away from this man before her. This was the true face of the monster she'd been drawn to, and yet she couldn't look away. "Clean this up," Victor commanded his remaining men, his voice eerily calm. His gaze swept the warehouse, calculating and cold, before landing on Elena. Something flickered in his eyes. Concern, perhaps, or possession. He crossed to her in long strides, his hand coming up to cup her face. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to form words. His touch was gentle, a stark contrast to the violence she'd just witnessed. It made her head spin, this duality in him. "Boss," one of his men called out, "we found something interesting." Victor's hand dropped from her face, but he remained close, his presence both threatening and protective. The man approached, holding out a phone. Victor's expression darkened as he scrolled through whatever was on the screen. "Mikhail," he growled, the name dripping with venom. "My own brother." Elena watched as rage transformed his features. Mikhail had been Victor's right hand, the only person he seemed to trust completely. The betrayal cut deep. She could see it in the way Victor's jaw clenched, in the dangerous gleam in his eyes. "Bring him to me," Victor ordered, his voice deadly quiet. Now, the warehouse erupted into activity again, as Victor's men moved to execute his command. Elena felt frozen in place, caught in the undertow of Victor's fury. He turned to her, his expression softening fractionally. "You see now?" he asked, stepping closer. "This is why I trust no one. This is why I can't let you go." His words should have frightened her, but instead, they sent a shiver of something else down her spine. Understanding, perhaps, or acceptance. She'd seen the worst of him now, seen the violence and the rage, and still, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. Within minutes, Mikhail was brought in, struggling against two of Victor's men. Blood trickled from his split lip, his expensive suit torn and dirty. Victor approached him slowly, like a predator stalking its prey. "Brother," Mikhail spat, "always so righteous, so controlling. Did you really think you could keep everyone under your thumb forever?" Victor's response was swift and brutal. His fist connected with Mikhail's jaw, sending him sprawling. "You betrayed me," Victor said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "After everything we've been through, after everything I've done for you." Elena watched, her heart in her throat, as Victor circled his brother. This was more than just business. This was personal, raw, bleeding. Victor's carefully constructed walls were cracking, revealing the wounded man beneath the monster. "Elena," Victor called out, not taking his eyes off Mikhail. "Come here." She moved without thinking, drawn to him even in this moment of violence. Victor's hand found hers, his grip tight enough to hurt. "This is what happens to those who betray me," he said, pulling out his gun. "Watch!" The shot echoed through the warehouse, and Mikhail's body crumpled to the floor. Elena flinched, but Victor's grip kept her in place. When he turned to her, his eyes were dark with emotion. Pain. "You can't leave," he warned, his voice rough. "Not now, not ever." Victor's mansion felt different after the betrayals. The marble floors echoed with an emptiness that hadn't been there before, and Elena's footsteps seemed louder in the stark silence. A week had passed since the warehouse confrontation, but the tension remained thick in the air. Elena noticed the changes in Victor immediately. His shoulders were rigid, his jaw permanently clenched. Where before he'd shown glimpses of vulnerability, now there was only ice. His eyes tracked her movements across rooms, but he barely spoke. When he did, his words were clipped, controlled. The staff avoided eye contact, scurrying away whenever Victor appeared. Elena understood their fear, sign he'd become unpredictable, dangerous, like a wounded animal ready to strike. One morning, Elena tried to go for her usual walk in the garden. Victor's voice cut through the air. "Inside." Just one word, but it carried the weight of an order. When she protested, his hand wrapped around her arm, firm but not painful. I said inside. The days blurred together. Victor's presence became suffocating, yet his emotional absence left an ache in Elena's chest. He'd appear suddenly behind her while she was reading, his breath warm on her neck, then disappear without a word. He'd watch her eat dinner, barely touching his own food, his gaze intense and unreadable. When Elena tried talking to one of the maids, Victor dismissed the girl immediately. "You don't need anyone else?" he said, his voice low and possessive. "You have me." The isolation should have terrified her. Instead, Elena found herself drawn to him more than ever. Every brush of his hand sent electricity through her body. Every shared glance carried unspoken tension. She fought against it, tried to maintain her independence, but Victor's pull was magnetic. One night, Elena couldn't sleep. She wandered to the library, seeking escape in books. Victor was there, nursing a glass of whiskey in the darkness. The moonlight caught his profile, highlighting the sharp angles of his face. "You should be sleeping," he said, not looking at her. "So should you." Elena's defiance sparked something in his eyes. Victor set down his glass and crossed the room in 3 long strides. His presence overwhelmed her, backing her against the bookshelf. The leather bindings pressed into her spine as he placed his hands on either side of her head. "Why do you keep fighting this?" His voice was rough, almost desperate. The mask of control was slipping. Elena's heart pounded. "Because you're trying to own me." "I already own you." His words ghosted across her lips. "You're mine, Elena. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." The kiss, when it came, was explosive. Victor's mouth claimed hers with desperate hunger, and Elena matched his intensity. Her fingers tangled in his hair as his hands gripped her waist, pulling her closer. The kiss deepened, became something wild and uncontrollable. All the tension of the past week poured into this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Victor's eyes were dark with possession. "You belong to me now," he said softly, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "Don't forget that." Elena's heart raced as she stared into those dangerous eyes, knowing she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows across Elena's empty bed. Her fingers traced her lips, still tingling from Victor's kiss the night before. The mansion felt different today, quieter, more oppressive. Victor was gone, leaving her alone with thoughts that threatened to consume her. She dressed slowly, each movement deliberate as she tried to make sense of the storm inside her. The kiss had changed everything and nothing at all. She was still his captive, wasn't she? Or had she become something more? The halls echoed with her footsteps as she made her way downstairs. Victor's men watched her with new interest. They'd seen the way their boss looked at her now. She felt exposed, vulnerable, yet somehow powerful. They wouldn't dare touch what Victor had claimed as his. In the kitchen, Elena found herself staring at the coffee maker, lost in thought. The bruise on her wrist from where Victor had gripped her during their kiss was fading, but the memory of his touch burned bright. How could someone so dangerous make her feel so safe? How could his control over her feel like both a cage and a shield? Hours crawled by. Elena wandered the mansion like a ghost, touching books she couldn't focus on reading, starting tasks she couldn't finish. Every sound made her heart jump. Was it him returning? The anticipation was maddening. When Victor finally appeared that evening, the air changed. He filled the doorway of the study where she'd been pretending to read, his presence electric. His suit was impeccable as always, but there was tension in his shoulders, a darkness in his eyes that spoke of violence to come. Elena. Her name on his lips was both a command and a caress. "We need to talk." She set down her book, trying to steady her trembling hands. "About last night? About tomorrow." Victor moved closer, each step measured. "My enemies are making their final move. I need you by my side." Elena's breath caught. "Why me?" "Because you're mine." He reached for her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. Because I need someone I can trust. And because you need to choose. Once and for all. The weight of his words pressed down on her. This wasn't just about standing beside him, it was about accepting his world, his darkness, his control. About admitting that somewhere along the way, her fear had transformed into something else entirely. And if I say no? Her voice was barely a whisper. Victor's eyes darkened. Then you'll never truly be free. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering if I'm there, wondering if today is the day I come to claim what's mine. His words should have terrified her. Instead, they sent a shiver of anticipation down her spine. She watched as he pulled away, moving toward the door with the fluid grace of a predator. Before leaving, he turned back, his expression unreadable. If you walk away now, you'll never be free of me, he warned, voice low and dangerous. Elena's heart pounded against her ribs. In that moment, she knew she'd made her choice long ago. Perhaps the first time she'd looked into his eyes and seen the monster that lurked there. She would stay, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because somewhere between fear and fascination, she'd fallen for the very thing that should have made her run. The warehouse loomed before them, its steel walls gleaming dully in the late afternoon sun. Elena's heart thundered in her chest as Victor's car pulled up to the location. His men surrounded them, a small army ready for war. But Elena could only focus on the rigid set of Victor's jaw, the dangerous glint in his eyes. "Stay close to me," Victor commanded, his voice low and harsh. He reached for her hand, his grip firm but not painful. The touch sent electricity through her body, grounding her in this moment of impending chaos. Inside, the warehouse was eerily quiet. Their footsteps echoed off concrete floors and metal walls. Elena could smell oil and rust, mixed with something metallic that made her stomach turn. Victor's presence beside her was both terrifying and comforting, a contradiction she'd grown used to. The rival gang emerged from the shadows like specters, their weapons glinting in the dim light filtering through dirty windows. Elena recognized some faces from the restaurant attack that felt like a lifetime ago. The leader stepped forward, a scarred man with cold eyes. "Drakov," he sneered. "Finally decided to face us yourself?" Victor's response was immediate and devastating. The first shot rang out before anyone could blink, and chaos erupted. Elena found herself pulled behind a stack of crates as bullets sprayed through the air. Victor moved like a demon unleashed, his actions precise and lethal. There was no hesitation in his movements, no mercy in his eyes. Blood splattered across concrete floors. Men fell screaming. Through it all, Elena watched Victor transform into something both beautiful and terrible. He wasn't just fighting. He was orchestrating destruction with the grace of a conductor leading a symphony of violence. A stray bullet whizzed past Elena's head, and she ducked lower. Victor's eyes snapped to her immediately, checking she was safe, even as he continued his deadly dance. The concern in his gaze, even amid such brutality, made her breath catch. Bodies littered the floor. The rival gang's numbers dwindled rapidly under Victor's assault. His men moved with practiced efficiency, but it was clear who commanded this battle. Victor's presence dominated the warehouse, his power undeniable as he systematically destroyed everyone who had dared to threaten what was his. Elena found herself moving with him, instinctively understanding when to duck, when to run. They worked in perfect synchronization, as if they'd been doing this dance forever. When a gang member tried to flank them, Elena called out a warning. Victor spun, eliminating the threat without missing a beat. The fight seemed to last both forever and mere seconds. When the last shot rang out, the silence that followed was deafening. Victor stood in the center of the carnage, his shirt spattered with blood, his breathing heavy but controlled. His eyes found Elena's across the room, and the intensity in them made her shiver. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. His touch left smears of red on her skin, but Elena didn't flinch. She couldn't, not when he was looking at her like that, like she was the only thing anchoring him to sanity in this moment of savage victory. "We've won," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. This wasn't just about defeating enemies, it was about claiming their future, about cementing the bond that had grown between them despite everything. Victor's black Bentley glided through the iron gates of the mansion, the engine's purr breaking the eerie silence of dawn. Elena's hands were still trembling, her designer dress stained with specks of blood that weren't her own. Beside her, Victor sat with his usual composure, but she noticed the tight grip of his fingers on the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. The mansion loomed before them, a fortress of marble and secrets. As they stepped inside, Elena felt the weight of everything they'd been through crash over her. The grand foyer, with its crystal chandelier and polished floors, seemed different now. This wasn't just Victor's gilded cage anymore. It was home. "Are you hurt?" Victor's voice cut through her thoughts, softer than usual. His eyes scanned her body, checking for injuries with an intensity that made her breath catch. "No," Elena whispered, watching as he shrugged off his jacket, revealing a tear in his white shirt. There was blood there, but he didn't seem to notice or care. "But you are." He dismissed her concern with a wave of his hand. "It's nothing." His gaze never left her face, drinking her in like a man dying of thirst. The violence of the night clung to him like a second skin. But there was something else there too, a vulnerability she rarely saw. Elena moved closer, drawn to him despite herself. The mansion was quiet, their footsteps echoing off the marble floors as they made their way to his private study. The familiar scent of leather and expensive cologne wrapped around her, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. "It's over," Victor said, pouring himself a drink. His hands were steady, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. "They won't threaten us again." The us didn't escape her notice. She watched as he took a long sip of his whiskey, remembering how he'd fought precise, lethal, beautiful in his deadly grace. He'd killed to protect what was his, and she couldn't deny any more that she was part of that equation. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor set down his glass and moved toward her with predatory grace. His fingers traced her jaw, tilting her face up to his. "Now," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you stop fighting this. Stop fighting us." Elena's heart thundered in her chest. The man before her was dangerous, she'd seen proof of that tonight. But he was also the only one who made her feel truly alive. The only one who saw past her carefully constructed walls and wanted her anyway. "I'm not fighting anymore," she admitted, leaning into his touch. The admission felt like surrender and victory all at once. Victor's eyes darkened with satisfaction. He pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair while the other wrapped possessively around her waist. The heat of his body against hers was intoxicating, washing away the horrors of the night. "You were never just a captive, Elena," he murmured against her skin. "From the moment I saw you, you were meant to be mine. My queen, my everything." She knew it was true. All the resistance, all the fighting, it had led them here. To this moment, this understanding. She belonged in his world now, belonged to him, just as he belonged to her. Victor's lips brushed her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "You're mine, forever," he whispered, the words both a promise and a command. Elena met his gaze, seeing in his eyes everything he couldn't say. The passion, the possession, the promise of a future together. She knew then that nothing would ever tear them apart. In his darkness, she had found her light. The mansion felt different now, Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors where blood had been spilled just days before. Elena traced her fingers along the cool walls as she walked, remembering the chaos that had filled these halls. Now, an eerie quiet had settled over everything. Victor's presence still commanded every room, but there was a shift in how he carried himself. The tension in his shoulders had eased slightly, though his eyes remained vigilant. He kept Elena close, closer than ever before, as if afraid she might disappear if he looked away too long. Their mornings began with coffee on the terrace, Victor's men delivering reports while Elena watched the garden below. The afternoons were filled with meetings, Victor rebuilding his empire piece by piece. Elena observed it all, caught between fascination and unease at how easily he wielded his power. "You're quiet today," Victor said one morning, his dark eyes studying her face. They sat in his office, the space that had once terrified her now feeling almost familiar. "Just thinking," Elena replied, meeting his gaze. She couldn't deny how natural it felt now, being here with him. The fear hadn't completely disappeared, but it had transformed into something else, something that made her pulse quicken whenever he was near. But the peace they'd found was fragile. Elena could feel it in the way Victor's men whispered when they thought she couldn't hear, in the way he doubled the security around the mansion. The war might be over, but dangers still lurked in the shadows of their world. "You know you can't leave," Victor said one evening, his voice cutting through her thoughts. He stood behind her as she gazed out the window, his hands resting possessively on her shoulders. "There are still people who would use you to get to me." Elena felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. This was the choice before her stay in his world of darkness and power, or fight for the freedom she'd once craved so desperately. But freedom, she was beginning to realize, came with its own price. "I know," she whispered, leaning back against him. His arms wrapped around her waist, strong and secure. The days blurred together, each one bringing new challenges. Elena watched Victor navigate his world with calculated precision, eliminating threats before they could fully form. She saw the darkness in him, the violence that lived just beneath the surface. But she also saw the way he looked at her when no one else was watching, like she was the only light in his world of shadows. "They won't stop coming for us," Victor told her one night, his voice rough with exhaustion. "This life, my life, it's not something you can walk away from." Elena understood the choice he was laying before her. This wasn't just about staying or going anymore. It was about accepting all of him, the monster and the man, the darkness and the rare moments of tenderness he showed only to her. She found herself standing in their bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her wasn't the same waitress who had been dragged into this world against her will. This woman was stronger, harder, shaped by the violence and passion of Victor's world. Victor appeared behind her, their eyes meeting in the reflection. His presence filled the room, demanding and protective all at once. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle despite the strength she knew he possessed. "You're all I have," he said quietly, the words falling between them like a confession. Elena felt their weight, understood what it cost him to admit such vulnerability. The world outside their windows was still dangerous, still filled with threats waiting to tear them apart. But as Elena stood there, her hand in Victor's, she felt something shift inside her. The choice before her wasn't really a choice at all, it never had been. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains of Victor's mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Elena stood at the window, her fingers tracing patterns on the cold glass. The final battle was over, but the weight of everything that had happened still pressed heavy on her chest. Behind her, Victor's footsteps echoed through the room. She didn't turn around, but she felt his presence, that magnetic pull that had drawn her in from the very beginning. His reflection appeared in the window beside hers, dark and imposing. "You're thinking too hard," he said, his voice low and rough. Elena closed her eyes, letting out a shaky breath. How can I not? The past weeks played through her mind like a violent film, the gunshots, the blood, the way Victor had torn through his enemies without hesitation. And through it all, she had stayed. She had watched. She had chosen him again and again. Look at me, Victor commanded softly. She turned, meeting his intense gaze. His face bore new scars from the recent fighting, but his eyes were the same dark, demanding, filled with that dangerous mix of possession and protection that made her heart race. This is who I am, Elena. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. This world, this life, it's not going to change. I know. Her voice was barely a whisper. Victor's thumb traced her bottom lip, the gentle touch at odds with the power she knew those hands possessed. Then you know what I'm asking. Elena pulled away, needing space to think. The mansion stretched around them, beautiful and suffocating. This had been her prison once, but somewhere along the way, it had become something else. A home? A fortress? She wasn't sure anymore. I can't pretend anymore, Victor. She wrapped her arms around herself. I can't act like what you do doesn't affect me. The violence, the control. I won't apologize for protecting what's mine. His words carried that edge of danger she'd come to know so well. And you are mine, Elena. You've been mine since the moment you looked at me in that restaurant. She turned back to him, anger flaring. Is that all I am to you? A possession? Victor moved with predatory grace, backing her against the window, his hands planted on either side of her head, caging her in. You know better than that. His voice dropped lower, sending shivers down her spine. You've seen parts of me no one else has. You've stayed when others would have run. You've challenged me, fought me, made me question everything I thought I knew. Elena's heart hammered in her chest. She could feel the heat of his body, smell the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with gunpowder and leather. And what has that gotten me? A choice. Victor stepped back, creating space between them. The only one I'll ever give you. The air felt heavy with the weight of his words. Elena watched him. This dangerous man who had crashed into her life and turned everything upside down. The man who killed without remorse, but touched her with such tenderness. The man who had given her both nightmares and dreams. Stay with me, he said, holding out his hand. Not as my prisoner, not as my possession, but as my equal, my queen. His eyes burned with intensity. Or walk away. Right now. I won't stop you. Elena stared at his outstretched hand. In it, she saw everything: the violence and the protection, the control and the freedom, the darkness and the light. This was Victor's world, and he was offering her a place in it, knowing she understood exactly what that meant. Her heart raced as she took a step forward. There would be no going back from this choice. No more pretending she could escape. No more fighting against what she'd become. Elena reached for Victor's hand, her decision made. I hope you liked this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.